this discussion, we ask that you engage and ask questions directly at any of the participants. It is my honor now to turn it over to the one who has led through all eras of the party, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who will open up this discussion for us today. Uhuru.
Uhuru. I want to welcome everyone to this study. As you remember, we began this study some time ago, every Sunday at 8 a.m. Eastern Time, because we were initially growing so many people in the Department of Agitation and Propaganda that we thought it to be extremely important to begin the process of political education, so those who constitute the organ of the party that's most responsible for educating members of the party, for helping to build and develop cadre, for taking the theory of African internationalism, all of our political campaigns and the rest of it out into the masses. It was really important to begin to deepen their understanding because, as you know, we had a revolutionary movement that was defeated. It was crushed. People were assassinated, murdered, and that many people who were coming into political life, they were coming in political life for the first time. And that included even the people who were coming into the Department of Agitation and Propaganda that had the responsibility of producing and distributing ideas coming from the revolution, coming from the African People's Socialist Party. So that was the beginning of this process. And then the popularity of the study grew to such an extent that we opened it up and recognized that we had to bring the entire party, the entire movement into this discussion and to open it up to the extent possible to people out in the world so that the political education, the theory, African internationalism, the campaigns, programs of the African People's Socialist Party could benefit the entire world revolutionary project. And that's why we're here today. And I want to say that this study, we're spending a lot of time on the discussion of the history of the party, which is chapter 5 in the political report to the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party that occurred in October of last year. And I want to say that this Congress was an incredible feat itself. It is a part of the history of the revolutionary project that the African People's Socialist Party is responsible for. Even the process of bringing people and the programs and ideas of the African Revolution to a situation where members of the party, members of the public at large, who were interested in making revolution, who wanted to join and unite with the African Revolution, were able to do this in a Congress and to express their will by voting on the programs of the party, to express their will in whether or not they united with the basic assessment that the African People's Socialist Party has made of the history of the revolutionary movement, and made of the current situation that the world is confronted with in terms of overturning a social system based on slavery and genocide. And this is historic, and we have established this as a tradition, so we're talking about the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. And this is a part of the history, if you will, of the party. And so we're looking at chapter 5 of the history of the party from the political report to the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party, titled Vanguard, the African People's Socialist Party, the Advanced Detachment of the African Revolution. And also it's important for us to say that we are doing this with different members of the party, different participants of our movement, revolution, from different eras and what have you, because history is dynamic. It is not some static stuff. You don't just get born one day and then become a revolutionary, or the revolution is here. There are all kinds of people during this era of a sort of Oprah Winfrey, Jerry Springer type politic where personalities and persons and this kind of thing attempt to dominate and dumb down the mass of the people, so people cannot come into contact with the history of a revolutionary project, and where it becomes unnecessary to have a program, where it becomes unnecessary to be able to define who you are ideologically, politically, things like that. So this has become a sort of a substitute for recognizing what revolution is. And so we want to have this discussion, and we want to allow, to open it up so that people who are veterans of the party's movement, people who have been here for generations, will have an opportunity to not just talk about history as a dead thing, but as a process in which they were involved in changing the world and going through all of the struggles that we had to go through to make this happen. We're talking about a situation, for example, last month in December, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Burning Spear newspaper. The 50th anniversary of the Burning Spear newspaper. This is incredible. Many people have an opportunity to get and read and distribute the Burning Spear newspaper, but these are people who, generally speaking, just came upon the newspaper just now, and just now have the responsibility of distributing the newspaper, and occasionally have the responsibility of writing for the newspaper, and buying the newspaper, seeing the newspaper, but it didn't just pop up magically. The fact of the matter is that the Burning Spear newspaper was begun right here where we are located in St. Petersburg, Florida, where on the floor of what we called the Freedom House at that time, that no longer exists because the government wants to remove all evidence that a revolutionary project ever existed in the city of St. Petersburg, and so they ran a freeway through the African community that destroyed that house. But in that house was some of the most remarkable struggle. First from the JOMO, the Junta Militant Organization, and it was on the floor there that we laid out the first issue of the tabloid version of the Burning Spear, as opposed to what initially was an 8.5 by 11 kind of thing that they used to call it mimeograph. It's an old technique of printing where we would make a carbon, it's almost like a carbon copy, but it's different, stronger and what have you, and then turn it through this machine that would produce 8.5 by 11 size pages, and we put out this newspaper then. That was the first time. And then in December 50 years ago, we laid out the first edition of the Burning Spear newspaper on the floor on 2450 Harrington Avenue South in St. Petersburg, Florida. And look back at it now, and where we had hand-drawn burning spears crossing the masthead, and we didn't understand how to use certain kinds of tools that would make the corrections we were making on the sidelines invisible, and so some of those popped up in it. So it was a pretty crude and amateurish beginning, but it started there. That's how it started. And we're talking about a movement where I'm speaking to you now from Aquaba Hall in St. Petersburg, Florida. But this is a relatively new phenomenon. I'm talking about people can walk in and get introduced to our party and our movement and make the assumption that there always was this Aquaba Hall. Or you may have had the experience of seeing the Aquaba Hall developed in St. Louis, which is a magnificent, beautiful institution. But it's something that would not even have been dreamed of or thought of during the era where we first began doing this work. And Omali Kefim, who is a veteran of the party but who is not here now, could talk about the office we had in Vine City in Florida, where in Georgia rather, Atlanta, Georgia, where we were organizing. And our office, our house door, sometimes we lived in one place where the door was not even on the hinges, And we can remember a woman being frightened nearly to death coming looking for us and knocking on the door, and the door fell off because that was the circumstances, the conditions under which we worked at the time. We worked in Atlanta during periods where we had no ability to pay the water and the light bills and things like that. And on one occasion, the government would come through and turn the water off, and we'd wait until they leave and turn the water back on. And these were the conditions that we experienced. So it wasn't like we always had an Uhura house or we always had an Aquaba Hall, whether it's in St. Petersburg, Florida, or Oakland, California, or whether it's in St. Louis, Missouri, that these were difficult times. And we had no resources. The way we got resources, and we've had people talk about this already, and we'll talk more about it, but we sent people out into the orange groves in Florida. Members of our party went into the orange groves and picked oranges and what have you, so that we could have resources to be able to do the work for the people, so that we can function as professional revolutionaries, so we wouldn't be part-time revolutionaries. but people who could do it all the time. We raised our own money. We lived collectively. We shared the toilets and we shared the work, the cooking, and everything else at that time. A very serious situation. And then we moved forward through all kinds of struggles and made incredible movements. We are the ones who were engaged in struggle to free Pitts and Lee, two African men who had been convicted and sat on death row for 12 years for killing a white man that a white man had already confessed to having done. We are the ones who intervened in that process, and we had demonstrations at the inauguration of the governor of Florida. We had, I personally was involved in a confrontation at the governor's office, in the governor's office, with the person from the highway patrol, the sheriff of the county where the state capital is located, around the case of Pitts and Lee. Personally, in physical confrontation, physical struggle in the governor's office. This was our movement. We were everywhere. We did everything in order to win the freedom. And this is what people need to understand, so that this in our movement becomes your history. It's important because revolutionary movements are not just given to people. People have to struggle. You have to struggle through all kinds of things, that the government will come for you as they did come for us. Even with the Pitts and Lee struggle that I just mentioned, we forced them to free Pitts and Lee, but they didn't say the revolution forced them to free Pitts and Lee. They got a guy from Miami who was the Miami Herald who wrote 2 or 3 articles on Pitts and Lee, and then they were forced to free him because they couldn't have a governor's inauguration, because they couldn't be at peace, because we were at the governor's mansion, because we were demonstrating at the Capitol, because even in the governor's office they had to confront me. That made it necessary for them to free Pitts and Lee, because this was a governor who they had expected to be the guy who the Democratic Party would run for president, who would become what Jimmy Carter turned out to be for them in terms of breaking up the Republican Party Southern strategy, began a Southern white man to run for office successfully for presidents. And we busted that up, and they couldn't say the revolution did it, so they got this guy who wrote articles in the Miami Herald and said that this is why we had to let Pitts and Lee go, because he wrote these wonderful articles. This guy didn't disrupt the governor's inauguration. This guy wasn't the one who was having demonstrations every place the governor went. This guy wasn't the one who tussled with the highway patrol and the sheriff in the governor's office. This was us. This was our movement, our party. And of course, because they don't want to give credence or credibility to the revolution, they don't want the masses of people to see what revolution and real struggle can result in. They say a guy from the Miami Herald suddenly decided to write these articles, and suddenly that's the basis for the freedom. My point, brothers and sisters, comrades, is that struggle can provide in results, but there must be organized struggle. There must be program. There must be philosophy. There must be something that brings it all together, because our people are always wanting to resist, and people always do resist, but they don't always have leadership. They don't always have ideological clarity. They don't always have organization based on organizational principles that would lead to overturning the relationship we have with white power, and that's what this party has done historically, and that's what we're doing now. And we want to arm our people, arm our party, arm our movement, arm the people who want to make revolution with an understanding of what happened to make that, to bring us to this point. Why the African Revolution is alive today. And I can say precisely because the African People's Socialist Party is alive today. There is no other evidence of the revolutionary project of black people any place on the world that has attempted to pull African people together to overturn our oppression, to unite our Africa and unite African people around the world. You can't find that any place else, but you can find more than 25, almost 30 particular kinds of institutions that have been created over the years by the African People's Socialist Party that exist for that purpose. Economic institutions, political institutions, you name it. We've done it. And the Uhuru House in Aquaba Hall, where I'm now sitting is part of that entire process of the work of the African People's Socialist Party. We've defied everything they've thrown at us up to this time, because when they threw it at us, we knew they were throwing it at the revolution. And no matter how tired we may have come, we decided that we were not going to allow the revolution to be pushed back or defeated. And that's why we're here. That's what being the Vanguard really means. That's what being the Advanced Detachment really means. And so there have been all kinds of efforts. Derail the African People's Socialist Party, you derail the revolution. That's why they attack us. That's why derail Omali Yeshitela, you derail the leadership of the African Revolution. That is how they think, and that is how they have moved, and that's why we continue to be dedicated to overturning this relationship, building genuine revolutionary forces who can move beyond Jerry Springerism, beyond some basically subjective kind of politic, and uniting with real, genuine revolutionary principles, revolutionary programs, and that's a critical thing too. And then because theory, which we think is critical to be able to inform our practice, but theory without practice is meaningless. And you see the practice of the party in the programs, you see the practice of the party in the almost 50-year history of the African People's Socialist Party alone, and that's what we're trying to bring to this discussion at this moment. So I wanted to sort of open that up. And then I also want to share this with you before going to these incredible comrades who we're going to be talking to momentarily. On last year, 2018, January, Martin Luther King Day celebration. You know, the government, the American government, the United States government murdered Martin Luther King. And after they murdered King, they began to love him. They co-opted King, what he was about, and then defined King for the masses of the people. Now, the African People's Socialist Party was fundamentally opposed to the philosophy of Dr. Martin Luther King, and still are fundamentally opposed to the philosophy of Dr. Martin Luther King. But we recognize King as being an historically powerful and politically significant force in our struggle. Because what King did, despite every effort being made by the government, who now suddenly decided to love King, who hated him when he was alive, what King did was mobilize African masses of people against basic, obvious evidence of oppression and exploitation. King mobilized African people. And this mobilization of the African masses of people contributed to the ability of revolutionary politics to penetrate the consciousness of people and to take them to a much higher level of struggle beyond what King was doing, who was trying to fix America. And we were not trying to fix America, we're trying to actually fix our condition, which means that we have to fight America so that African people could be free. Having said that, King was an important factor because he did mobilize people. People, the oppressor like to say, well, King was about not judging people on the color of their skin, but something about their character, etc. And then they would use that phrase to denounce black people, denounce African men who might be sagging or some other thing like that was the fundamental contradiction that King was talking about. They kill him and then they speak for him. They destroy the revolution, then they speak for the revolution. That's what they always have attempted to do. Because King was a part of the black revolution of the 1960s. He had a different politics, a different line, and would not have resulted in revolution. And so we respected King, but we disagreed with him philosophically. And today, because people love Martin Luther King, and because the ruling class now, that they can love him now because they killed him. They murdered Martin Luther King. All the evidence is there that they murdered King. I mean, for all of the time he was in motion, the FBI, the good presidents and the bad presidents, all of them conspired to stop King, to keep him from being able to lead African people into this struggle. And so what has happened is they murdered King, the one who was trying to provide the struggle, lead the struggle for democratic rights. And then they named streets for him all over the country. They named streets, Martin Luther King Boulevard, you can find it in every city in this country. And so they give us a street. They give us a day that people can get drunk and carry on and what have you, but you don't make revolution because they destroyed the revolutionary character of Martin Luther King and turned it into something that just said, turn the other cheeks, of certain kind of passivity. That's what they want to bring. But nevertheless, in the city of St. Petersburg, Florida, there has been the largest parade coming together of African people, certainly in the South and probably in the country, around Martin Luther King. And St. Petersburg, Florida, you got to remember, is only 23% African. So it's a quote-unquote minority population in this city. But huge masses of people from everywhere came to St. Petersburg, Florida. And this is the day where vendors came out, all on Martin Luther King, Africans people, and vendors who made half their income on that day. But the city of St. Petersburg has been involved in an open, obvious campaign to push the African population out of St. Petersburg, Florida. They call it gentrification. And you can see all around you high-rises going up and vending going up all over the white community in St. Petersburg, Florida. You go to the Central Avenue, which is the dividing avenue from north and south in the city of St. Petersburg, and everything north of Central, you see vending going up on Central, up and down, every place about white people. You see on holidays, St. Patrick's Day, Gay Pride Day, First Fridays and stuff like that, white people who are involved in all kinds of debauchery, drinking, vomiting, carrying on, and there's nothing coming from the city to oppose that. But on Martin Luther King Day, where thousands, literally thousands, perhaps as many as 100,000 or more Africans come to this city. St. Petersburg, Florida doesn't have 100,000 African people, but come from every place, and as I said, the vendors make at least half their income on that particular day. Then last year, the city decided to put out all kinds of information. I think it's the second year the city put it out and told people that they couldn't vend unless they paid an exorbitant amount of money, that they had to have a certain kind of licenses, etc. And then last year what they did was they came in heavy with really armed presence. They came in and they actually shut the entire African community down. It could have been someplace in Syria or Afghanistan, just the heavy presence of the police. People couldn't move in the communities. People couldn't stop any place. And it wasn't just on Martin Luther King. It was the entire community that they had locked it down, cordoned it off, and then told Africans the only place you can have a Martin Luther King celebration is not on Martin Luther King Street, not in your own community, but you got to go to this dome. And the dome is a so-called baseball dome that sits on a community that used to be African, where they chased out more than 100 businesses there. They chased out something like 800 families who were there, and they put a damn baseball team, the dome there. And they put the dome and its properties actually sits on a graveyard of black people that existed there before. So now they say that you can't be on Martin Luther King because they don't want black people coming together. They don't want black people doing that. And then they also intend to push black people out. There's nothing here for you, niggas. And you're getting out of town because we're going to gentrify this, and we're going to grow more high-rises, more white businesses, more white breweries, and all this stuff that's springing up, more blue bicycles for rent, all of this stuff to displace the African community. And they had help, because even the people who were supposed to be opposed to this is liberal Negroes, some of them militantly liberal, who worked with them in their little programs. And then I think maybe a month or so ago, they came to a meeting of the Uhuru movement and saying that what they're going to do is they're going to ask the police to give amnesty to the vendors. You out of your mind. You know, if we have to fight. And so what we did, we took it to the people. And we began a campaign in the city of St. Petersburg. And we worked the African community and we worked the white community. We had members of the Solidarity Committee of our movement going into the white community. We went to the venues where they were having First Friday Drunk Fest on Central Avenue and things like that, and talked to the people. We talked to tourists. We let them know that we were going to disrupt the tourist industry. This is tourist season and what have you. We put up posters calling for 10,000 African guerrilla shock troops, that we were going to resist and fight back this time. And guess what? A couple of days ago, we heard from the city that they ain't gonna mess with nobody this year, that the people will be able to vend on and congregate on Martin Luther King Street. They don't have to have licenses to do that if there's private property, etc., and that they are gonna let it be just like it used to be. That's what they're saying. And this was a great victory, and people who are on this, in this study today played a role in making that happen because of your cause, and also they knew you were coming. They knew that that reinforcements were on the way. And then, of course, Black Power 96 FM radio station, which kept the information before the people about what was going on, played a major role in this project, in which broadcast people in the community saying that it ain't going to be like that, we're going to struggle, we're going to resist, and began to really expose the city and what it was doing. So now the city says that, without saying you're victorious, they said, okay, you can do it the way you want to do it. Of course, what they expect is they change the route of the parade, they take it to the dome anyway, assuming and hoping that the people will go to the dome to participate. But we have won this magnificent victory, and you have participated in making this victory, and we intend to have a magnificent process here. And what they've done is they've armed the people, because the people know that resistance now was necessary in order for this to occur, and that this helps the people to know that victory can be won through resistance. But just like they did with Pitts and Lee, what they have done now is that the people who were talking about let's beg for amnesty, who crawl on their bellies and kiss their feet and other parts of their body, that to say, boss, can we please do that? They now are saying that it's because that these people sat down with them and et cetera, et cetera. But I just want everybody to know that we won this, and the people won this, and the Uhuru movement won this, the African People's Socialist Party won this, and the people in a much stronger place as a consequence of that struggle. And that's a part of the history of the African People's Socialist Party also. And it's a dynamic history, as I said before. It's not some static thing where you can just come up with dates, this happened, that happened, et cetera, but it's a living, dynamic history that responds to African people out on the streets with the Burning Spear newspaper, out on the streets with flyers, out there contesting everything that the enemy is doing, helping to raise the capacity of our people to struggle and to resist. That's what made it happen. And we still are moving forward, and I'm going to move forward because that was the longest introduction to a discussion that I've ever participated in. And so I just wanted to give you that information. I thought it was really important for you to know that. What I want to do, though, is just say that one of the most important things about our history revolves around the work that we did to build the African Socialist International. We came out of our first Congress that happened speaking of first Congress, happened in Oakland, California in 1981. And it was a hell of a Congress. It looks like our Congress flushes out all kinds of rot. And the Congress process flushes out all kinds of rot. And that happened in the Congress in 1981 too, because there was a sleeper in our party at that time who was a part of the leadership of our party at that time that actually made a secret deal with some other white left organization that was designed to take the party in an entirely different direction at the Congress. I happened to learn of what they were intending to do because the chump just left information out so that it could be seen. I saw it, and even tailored parts of my report, my political report to the Congress, to not target this person, but to reflect the line of the party. That the people in the party had to be won to the line, the politic of the party, as compared to any other line in any other politic. And that's what we saw happening in the political report to the Congress in 1981. And so this person ran away with his tail between his legs precisely because he had to say something to the Congress. And this is what they could not do. Stand up before the membership of the African People's Socialist Party, make your politic known, make your philosophical differences known, make your programmatic differences known. But this guy was too cowardly to do that then, and they've been too cowardly to do that since. And so after the Congress, they can come up with all kinds of madness and nonsense, but they had an opportunity to do it before the people, before the Congress, and they wouldn't do it. And so that happened in 1981, and that's where we put forth the resolution at the first Congress of the African People's Socialist Party to build the African Socialist International. And we've been working for that since that time, and we made some magnificent leaps, especially around the 2000s. Before that, in 1982, at the first international, at the first tribunal, International World Tribunal for Reparation of African People, we had the first meeting to build the African Socialist International, again in Brooklyn, New York. And that simply, it petered out more or less, and by the 2000s, of course, we were traveling, 83, I traveled throughout Europe. 80s, I was traveling throughout Europe trying to make this happen. And then, of course, in the 2000s, a magnificent change occurred, and partially because of, we met Comrade Louise Kinshasa, who was in exile from Congo, but who loved revolution, loved the party, wanted to make some things happen. And I would like to begin this discussion by calling on Comrade Louise to just give us some discussions about his participation and what it was like and what we were involved in and the actual struggles to build the African Socialist International starting then, and other stuff that he can give us in a relatively short period of time, because I've stolen much of the time that people should be having for this discussion. Uhuru, Comrade Louise, are you there? Comrade Louise is in London, by the way. Hold on for a minute, Comrade. Hold on for a minute, Comrade Louise. What's happening?
The speaker should be turned
on. Can he go now? Louise, go ahead, Comrade. See what we got. No, it's not happening, Louise. Hold on. Hold on, Comrade Louise. Hold on, Comrade Louise. Please, if we can do this expeditiously, it'd be helpful. Is that it? Let's hear you, Louise. Let's see what we've got. Renee, would you ask Timber to come in? Let's see what you've got. Are you there, Louise? Let's test it. No, it's not. It's not. We don't have anything. Hold on. Go ahead, Louise. Let's hear you. Let's test it.
History of Einstein, also just as history of I was raised, it is enriching to know the strong history which in place and develop the science newspaper, which has been a tool that has contributed to the education of many generations of African people, and also of all the colonized people, or anybody else who really wants to know understand the African traditions, and more importantly, the way forward is the balance shift, the breaks away with the one approach that's coming from the West. You don't hear about Lenin or anybody else, any revolutionary, you just try to see somebody that's your right, and all kind of forces that dominate the ideology, the fact that into wherever we are, particularly in Europe. So I think that science can contribute to breaking that tradition, establishing our own tradition. And I think that's something we need to recognize. And for the efforts to build the African International, first, I would say that was not the only thing that was, but still the only response I've seen that goes beyond that talking about something. I've seen General General in 1993, 9/11, and then before that, I made a channel through his writing. So here, you make a body of field of philosophy, and it's calling for Africans to continue to struggle to the revolution to trace a trajectory that most of us will have forgotten because Kuma was around and Numa was around, and even people like Sankara came around, but he, deliver us or bring with them a body of theory that basically summarizes the great struggle of the 60s. What happened, what was achieved, what wasn't achieved, the great questions Shana talked about, which was left unresolved. So, the more I discovered basically the body, so the inside as a project, basically to follow up the revolutionary field was very appealing. But as the work began to happen, so the cinema was in 93, and it was again in 95, and that it would have to come again, if not chairman, other alternative body were coming to London, and we had a lot of discussions. We will, like 95, we will reach out to all groups, any group that talks about African United, or has some kind of group or, semblance of progressive politics, we reach out to them. And always basically, not just shocking, striking, I mean, you couldn't lose sight of that. Nobody had a plan or just a trajectory to organize the Africans in concrete way so that the workers can go to power. And most of the groups, women, they were concerned about maybe police violence, maybe voting third class racism, maybe dictatorship, where they're coming from. If they're going to library, of course, yeah, the dictator has to go. If they're coming from home, the dictator has to go. And so we had all these kind of young people in Sudan. They were more concerned about the relation of the so-called Arabs and things like that. So we made groups from many countries and many political organizations, but we thought we need an organization that declares itself revolutionary and prepared to do anything to Africa to be free, for the world to go in power, and that organization had its own sort of thing. We didn't need that. And if the way, if they consider themselves, let's say, socialist or communist, it was no something really they struggle for, or they put in practice that, or they definitely Advanced Detachment for food and Africa, United Orbits, Africa with power, and things like that. We see things like that. So, just to be short, after the 95 meeting, another one was taking place in 98. We agreed that we need definitely to have a conference, the North African Social International, and all these forces we have met, those who can come and they can participate, they will come to present the report and things like that. And the gentleman saying, come and lead here to help us organize, provide leadership great, and that was great because what we have learned through that time is basically how to begin to organize, not just based on the plan, but we need to have a efficient division of labor and great accountability for the work that needs to be done. We need to get out into the community or really tabling, going on a radio station, putting our line on the radio station, having regular meetings, people can join the community so we can keep the chance to participate and be part of it. And these are ordinary applicants who do not have a chance to be in the organization because nobody was doing kind of what we just introduced here. And that's how we were able to organize the first ASI conference in August 1999. It was a series of meetings and took us from London to High Manchester, Birmingham, all these places, but the biggest event was in London itself. And that's also the first time I think the solidarity forces from the African community were also introduced to me. And the question of solidarity itself changed because nobody was really raising the question of solidarity for Africans. People talk about solidarity, talking about human solidarity with Angola and other places, things like that. But demanding solidarity directly from the first white population, organized population to the African struggle, that was different from the norms. Nobody has seen anything like that. Of course, actually, in our discussion, I didn't get back all the nationals like that coming to the meeting. And what also is significant is the lack of ideological development of most organizations. It became very clear that most of the African organizations were dominated by African people already. Not just, as far as group of African leaders, but there's a thinking the political position on a question of land, South Africa, on are we African community, or are we a black community, or are we a black Asian community, and things like that. Identity, all these questions became quite sharper and sharper. You can see the differences emerging, and you do not hide the differences, and they have to be brushed out. And that's how we usually see also the question of African nationalism and Pan-Africanism. When it was inspired, it was this way, black people meeting and how just that everything. Nationalism meeting, and we go Pan-Africanism coming to this. And so we just open up the contradictions, and that's the way we see even forwarding, like opening up those contradictions to see what are the forces for the future, what are the forces we want to move forward, so we can solve all these problems. And so basically, what is the benefit it gave us is that, and that allows us to see that when going outside England, it could be France or in Africa, if you want to build up a relation organization, if you want to build up institutions, you want to build from scratch. All these forces who are there, there was no facilitated process of African Institutions International. But so I'm going to say there was no creating party on the ground. You have to go to the national it's independent forces, people who are attacking those organizations, it goes out to scratch. That's what I'm going to say. The foreign forces, most of them, they will respond on the ground if you give them that possibility to create organizations. If you demonstrate to them everything there, that's so one way or the other. So you go be, as you think the process forward, right? That's so you go with your organization. You go with the bottom of the ground, and that's what we did. And so in 1999, of course, we had that international conference, and all people came, the organization came, they gave the report, but they would not unite. Maybe they thought that was just another conference, as opposed to being a process that's developing, that's setting off all these forward schemes, and they're getting the new schemes so we go forward. They will come, they're doing reports, but all these things were not good enough. So you could show you become a member of the same organization. They did not make the decision. So there's, all the way to be, the sound board being standardized by the way, and things like that. But you can clear that African International is not the same. That fund is not there because we are there and we have to have an influence over this country. And then we start going to Europe, France, Belgium, all these places. So basically, the spread of the body is real, and that's basically the first part of actually 99 and 2000 up to 2006. Every year we organize African Justice International, and that completes basically the separation basically. So the identity of the party, of the African Class organization, of the socialist organization, as an international organization, was definitely achieved by 2004. That was pretty much clear. We can talk about, or we can give criticism of the Pan-Africanists, open anything wherever we go. People accept that we are not Pan-Africans. They might call us Black Power organization or who, but they know we are not Pan-Africans. I think where we are now is just a question of how now we're going to get the African working class disorganized at the moment to become part of the movement in the neighborhood, in the cities, wherever they are, so we can definitely complete I would say the rooting process, the technical root process of the organization. And the other aspect I would like to talk about building of the African Socialist International is just the document. Every conference we had a document or many documents. One of them is what we refer to as the main resolution. And that document, it was published in July 2004. Of course, before that, we had produced other documents, like the Black Manifesto, the African Socialist International principles, things like that. We had all these documents, the question of white people, all these documents were produced. So that made the party different from the Indian organization, because first we put to everyone that this is what we say, and you also have a chance to know what we're going to say, and you have a chance to discuss it, to say you unite with it. And if you do, or if you don't, you can also say why you don't. Up to now, I haven't seen nobody, who can trust and to say, I disagree with this document or the amendment resolution or anything like that. Or, nobody. And that's quite a long time. You think someone born in 2000, they're 18 years old or they're going to 19, it's quite a long time. And this is the strength of African internationalism. So if people don't talk to us, they can only slander, they can only be unprincipled, and that's it. That's what I see. Anybody who starts as government is on attack or is on an unprincipled way. Nobody has come and say, I challenge you on a reparation. When we as one community move forward with the reparation struggle here in England too, at the property that, but nobody has come forward to say, I disagree on this, on that. If they try to put the presence in the meeting, you can see that he has their position which is so weak that they do not beat that argument. That is impossible. And I remember one discussion took place the last question. We had this brother, he was an institutional organization, women, brother Nick. And he supported all of that who fought against so-called apartheid. And we exposed what it was, a liberal neo-colonialist organization with its freedom charter on the question of land. They gave the land to whites and things like that. And that you can't argue against that. The ANC always went against black people taking the land back. You couldn't argue on that. You couldn't argue that the ANC was there to become the new neocolonialist leader. All these questions before the ANC came to power, we already had positions on that. We just discovered, that ANC is going to be a neocolonialist organization. That was a position that lasted for many years. And you can't argue with the party on something like that, and you can't win nobody unless the person is also a principal. And we just want to, example, question of racism. You just imagine how African nationalism just destroy that nonsense. Racism is the main issue. So the same great questions, we discussed in the US, then the same questions also we discussed here. And the other aspect of African Socialist International, apart from producing this document, they allow everyone to take a position and unite with or disagree on a principle. We went to Africa. We went to South Africa in 2002 was. And we went to Sierra Leone in 2005. We went to Ghana 2008 and Kenya, I think 2010, I think it was. And going to South Africa, that was a defining moment because we were able to see that the African working class wants to move forward. They want to revolution, but they want a leadership that can take them there. And we witnessed that in a conference packed, over 2,000 people. And the chairman gave this presentation that everyone can see. We were invited by the Pan-Africanist, by the PAC, the Pan-Africanist Congress, because we, after many years of not being in touch since the end of apartheid, we finally made Agatami, Kaplaji, and so basically we facilitated the renewal basically of that brief relationship after the apartheid ended. So the chairman was the keynote speaker at the Congress, and themselves, the members of the PAC, referred to that Congress make it great, which means basically if it works, then the PAC will renew its revolutionary petition. In a way, it comes in all the way because we are in neocolonialist leadership now. If it breaks, then the ANC will become irrelevant. And the chairman showed the way. If the PAC want to play that role, they have to embrace African internationalism. If you look at that video, they usually wouldn't get that lane back outside of the revolution. It's just impossible. They can get the ANC out of power without revolution. There is no way, the African workers will get to power anywhere without revolution. And that revolution has to be a distance for all African people around the world. And watch that video for yourself, then you can see. But basically what I'm going to say, it was clear that the African Socialist International and African internationalism is a key part of the African process, particularly of the African revolution. Anyone who will go to the revolution, or anyone who wants to get out of this situation, get out to a new future, turn them back to this past that is really destroying our lives today, you have to come into African internationalism. It was clear, and the masses saw it. At one point, the masses, according to the chairman, came on the second day of the conference. But that was something that has to be resolved within the PAC organization itself, and it didn't happen. But we won the support of a fraction of the PAC, a sector of the PAC, Preorder Pan-Africanist Youth Organization, which is part of the PAC, but that's the youth section. We work with them. But the point we often make here that the ASI is not just a party you hear about in London or the United States, something like that. That
including organization through the grassroots in Africa. If they know about it, that the organization they will just take. And that's what I saw in South Africa, the mass calling for African internationalism. But, you know, we couldn't take the opportunity in that fashion, you know, because we had to work in a principal way. But you work out at the end with the people, because they couldn't unite democratic centralism, and they couldn't unite a single organization that organized the African revolution. And we saw that in Kenya. We had this brilliant meeting in 2010 with no publicity at all, because we couldn't really publicity there, because the Kenyan police would not allow it. The room was packed, over 200 people, and the massive was a revolution. They won the African internationalists. But the question is, where the leadership to do the work on the ground will come from. You know, that's the only reason we couldn't do it. We think we want some people, but anyone who comes to organization, it comes for many reasons to begin with, apart from, you know, being in love with what they heard, but in practice, you know, what the reader trying to solve. So we couldn't go forward with that. They say in Sierra Leone, the masses were enthusiastic. But you know, build the organization on the ground who can do the work. And the people who are always looking first is the African people who has always a different agenda. You know, they use anything. They use African internationalism, they use Marxism, they use Soviet Union, they use China, they use anything as long as they can get the power and solve the problems. That's how the African people work already. You know, that's our experience. You know, we came across people in Zimbabwe, all these places. So it's not African socialist internationalism that has been a problem, but it's actually the bourgeoisie. What I see on the top of the African working class and poor peasants everywhere in Africa. They are the most educated, they're the ones who have jobs, they have connections, they have a habit of, you know, thinking and, you know, looking into the future, things like that, of habit of organizing. So they maintain, this is a really quite struggle, they maintain control of our masses, of our people. So that's easy, is the problem. So our job is to break that obstacle, that wall of made by just the people who engage in the masses. And this is happening, you know, in South Africa. We are there doing the work. So let's get to close this. My point was just that African internationalism is in Africa. The money moving to the speed everyone would like to, but all this slow progress moving everywhere at one point will culminate into a fast movement that might capture a lot of people by surprise. You know, that's the directives of nature, but those slow movements are taking place. And, you know, and there are other aspects of that. So just to conclude, basically, we should see African Process International and African internationalism as a successful, not just story, if I might say that, but as a successful project, as a rising project, as a project of the future. Many people like to receive things on the television. You can show the TV, oh, that's success, because success most of the time is organized by the white people. To the press, you know, that tell you this sportsman, you know, sportswoman is successful because she's on TV. But you might know, heard of the struggle in the, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing, Silobani, in South Africa, where the working class invented for the, you know, giant Australian mining company to open a mine in South Africa. You don't get struggles like that. You know, there are many struggles taking place, you know, and part of these struggles taking place in Africa, one of them is African internationalism struggle. Struggle to win into the new struggle to new regions. That struggle is taking place. And the white media won't tell you that it's taking place. And we tell you that, and this is the real struggle. And we're moving. I know people, they will see for that to come on the TV, but we are moving. We just need to read. More and more people are listening to us. They're saying we are correct. They like to hear what we say. But we haven't reached the critical point, you know, critical mass, as some business people like to say. We haven't reached that yet, but we're getting there. And that's why you need to join, so we can fasten our process. So I just wanted to say some of those things that I'll stop here.
Well, I want to thank Comrade Louise for that presentation. I think it's extremely important. One of the things that I found that he mentioned that we should pay attention to is that it's always been the petty bourgeoisie that's tried to stand between us and the masses that would keep people from coming to revolutionary organization. The fact is that when I spoke at the 8th Congress of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania in Mtata, and the crisis struggle developed within that organization that was so severe that they could not come to good conclusions. The thousands of people who were there, the cheering, because I laid out more or less a plan of action for the POC if they wanted to move forward. And the thousands of people who were members who attended that expressed their solidarity in deep and profound ways, to the point that when the crisis developed and the organization couldn't move forward, the people in the audience began calling for me to take charge of the meeting. And that's a statement, that's a profound statement. They were saying Uhuru should do it, right? And so I think that's really important to acknowledge that. And then the thing is, we all over Sierra Leone, we spoke to thousands of people in Sierra Leone, conferences, and the people wanted the revolution, but the persons who were in our organization, who we had recruited, who had volunteered to be a part of our struggle in the process of building the African Socialist International, they were corrupt. They stole equipment, they stole that we were going to do with the radio station, the stuff we were doing to create a boat for the people who needed to be, a motor for the people who were building boats to be able to compete with the imperialists who were overfishing off the coast, and the people didn't have the ability to get far enough out from the coast to do successful fishing. We initiated that process, and then the person who frustrated that, the one who was in our own organization, the one who we had recruited, who we had assumed wanted to do this. We worked with comrades from Sierra Leone, from Ivory Coast, as Comrade Louise mentioned. And help to even get the process, initiate the process to establish a newspaper that they could use to be able to contend with the bourgeoisie in Sierra Leone and neocolonialism in Sierra Leone, and then they turned out to be the neocolonialists themselves. So there's no straight line in this revolutionary process, and there's always forces who will stand between us. There will always somebody who will pretend to be the people, and they're not the people. They're against the people. They're against the people's revolution, and they come to the ranks of the party because the party is valid, and the party is recognized as valid. Our line is valid. Our politics is valid. Everybody can see that. As Comrade Louise said, nobody has ever criticized the main resolution of the African Socialist International. It's been in place for all this time. That they can't fight. And so they come with other kinds of ways. That's why the popularity of the line, etc., is what draws them in, and then they want to get in to be able to put the brakes on everything that would take us to a revolutionary conclusion. Comrade Guy, do you know about it?
Yes, yes, Chairman. I really agree with everything that Louise put out, and I think the thing that you just addressed in terms of what happened in Azania was one of the most powerful things that I had seen happen in terms of how the people, when you started speaking, they did not understand Uhuru. I remember when you raised the slogan Uhuru, we had like a feeble response. But at the point that you had finished the speech, the people were just shouting. People could see it on the tape, you know, on the video. They were just shouting Uhuru, and the question of, you know, the contradiction that happened in, you know, in that Congress, the people was really hollering for the chairman to take over, and this was somebody that they had just met, but it was the politics that made so much sense to them, you know, that they were just really calling for the chairman to resolve the contradiction and to take over the Congress. And I thought that was the most powerful thing that I'd seen in terms of the politics gripping the masses of the people and becoming a material force. You know, I just thought that was really, you know, important. I really appreciated also Louise's presentation on the scenario in London, because that was one of the most difficult situations in terms of attempting to organize, you know, in London, you know, where all these nationalist, these groups, you know, black nationalist groups came together petty bourgeois groups and really attacked the party at several intervals because they were struggling for terror. But whenever we could get the honest forces, they would flock to meetings. They would come to the meetings and want to participate, but it was these other forces that kept them, away from the meetings. There was constant battle against African internationalism.
So you probably want to say something else about this whole process. We're looking at the 2000s, and I don't know if you wanted to, if there's anything else you want to contribute to that before we go to some of the other comrades. Because you were in the mix. In fact, you were the first one to go into Sierra Leone from the party. And you opened the door, blazed the path there, participated in rallies there on the ground, helping to win the people in the communities to a recognition of capitalist parasitism that was sucking the resources out of Sierra Leone that we began to hear from the masses of the people, which is another case, just like in London and England and France and other places where even if the party is not strong there, we've knocked down many of the ideological barriers and brought people to a much higher level of understanding relationship with imperialism, and I thought that was important. You may have something to say, not just about that, but anything, because we're talking 2000s now. Are you there, Comrade Gaida? Yeah, I was talking to you. Yeah.
I didn't hear it. Was kind of distant.
Okay, the only thing I was saying is that I was just saying that I know, go ahead, come in.
No, I was saying
yeah, I was saying that I know you were there with the ASI. You were there in Umtata in South Africa, and you were there in England where we had this contest with these horrible creatures where we transformed the politic in England would never be the same in the African communities as a consequence of our being there. And you traveled with us doing ASI work all over to France and various other kinds of Belgium and what have you. So I know you did that, and Comrade Louise had spoken of the work of the ASI, but we're also dealing with the whole question of the 2000s. I didn't know if there was anything that briefly you wanted to say about your participation in the party doing any other work, any place, during that era.
No, when I finished speaking, I thought about the situation in Sierra Leone when we first went into Sierra Leone, and also something similar to what happened in Chaka, because the conflict that we had to bring African internationalism to the masses of people that attended, and it was well attended. People had walked all night to get to this conference from different surrounding areas. I know there was a comrade that was representing Liberia, there was a comrade that was representing Guinea-Conakry, and there were just people that just came from everywhere. Some of them came under the most, depressing situation, and they signed off a document, but like you said, the petty bourgeoisie force that was in the party was the one that was blocking everything at every juncture. We began to notice that we got further doing that work. But one of the most impressive moments that affected me was when he brought the burning spear and the way the people ran from the burning spear. They never seen, calamity with food, and they tried to see that further stuff that happened. They were doubting. Everybody was grabbing the spears, and even when the conference started in groups reading the spears, it was just profound to see how people were embracing the politics, and the pronouncement of those forces that came from the surrounding area that signed on to a document saying that they wanted to be a part of, the ASI. And I just thought that was a big influence of the party, that was such a profound influence. And I was looking here above the benefits of forces that the lines actually I was clicked, and it made so much sense to them, because in these cases they were very depressed areas, and the people really wanted solutions. And not knowing us, but here in politics, which made a lot of sense to them, and people began to document, to go to the inner south.
Uhuru. Comment, Aisha, it was 2000s that you came into the work, wasn't it?
Yes, Chairman. It was 2005. I met the party at the 5th anniversary of the Million Man March, where the party had some forces there organizing people to define the revolution who was coming looking for honest answers and found garbage and the Million Man March. So that's why I met the party. You were there, and there were other comrades and your books were being sold there. And one of our comrades who also took it out to travel from Alabama To meet with community people, to assess, what kind of possibilities existed, and within a couple of months of that initial January assessment, we had already established our first program, which was a clean water program in the community of Sierra Leone called Ghana, where prior to the party and APSP intervening in that community, had been getting their water from the swamps, and from really filthy wells. And we kicked off a clean water project that was a two-part project. One aspect of it was actually building rainwater harvesting systems in the community, where we sent APSP members to help organize the community to learn how to establish these clean water systems. And the other aspect of the project was one where we sent one of our APSP members, who is a doctor who had been trained in the Cuban medical program there, sent her to begin to train the community on how to prevent, identify, and treat waterborne diseases. We trained about 50 community health workers as a part of that first program. So from the very beginning, the party, had the idea that we had to win, African people to recognize that it's not that we don't have the skills, it's not that we don't have the desire, but what we lack is organization, and what we lack is the theory that will allow us to see that it's not a clean water problem that we have, or a healthcare problem that we have. It's a political problem that we have. It's a problem of not having self-determination, and leading African people to the recognition that that we can solve all of African people's problems through the African Revolution, and that's something that I've truly appreciated about what the party has done in terms of establishing APSP and establishing all of the other organizations that make up the Uhuru movement.
Uhuru. Yeah, that was a real major impact, I think, that we had there in Sierra Leone, and it actually expanded beyond Sierra Leone, because when I was I traveled throughout Namibia, and speaking at universities and other places, and African students, and sometimes even professors talked about how they could participate in the APSP work. We saw that as a critical kind of thing for providing a practical means by which African people can unite. And it was a practical application of African internationalism that took us beyond some Pan-Africanist assumption that we all kind of black people or Africans, but actually talked about how we could make a practical program to freeing Africa and uniting Africa, and really recognizing, identifying a free Africa has been a liberated African people, and a united African people and Africans around the world, and APSP gave us an opportunity to take that on. And like I said, the implications are bigger. I mean, there were people, some of them were crooks, like out of Zimbabwe, where we had the borehole project that they took money from us, and there were other, they took it from the Africans, they took it from people in Zimbabwe and from people Africans and other places where these resources would have gone. But the point is that APSP's reach was much larger than just Sierra Leone. And even the work that APSP has done inside the United States, I think, is important with the community gardens, the backyard garden projects, and things like that. That's toward liberating African people, and that is a practical expression of African internationalism. Uhuru. And also, I'm really happy, because you're also a member of the Central Committee of the African People's Socialist Party, as is Comrade Louise Kinshasa, and as is Comrade yesterday over in Mila, and it's just been really important. I mean, we've got a Central Committee that is totally and absolutely united, and everything that we've tried to do. I mean, one of the striking features is that there hasn't been a divided Central Committee, and those instances where attempts to divide the Central Committee were made were successfully flushed out and defeated because there was working against all the principles of the party, and you knew they were against the principles of the party because everybody in the party, in the leadership of the party, was united. So I just wanted to acknowledge your membership in the Central Committee. And Comrade Bakri, we're talking about the 2000s. Do you want to contribute anything to this discussion about the party? Uhuru.
I really unite with all of the discussion and everything that's been said by comrades on this call as well. Some of the things that stand out to me in 2000 were kind of like close-knit together, and both of them occurred about the early part of 2009 in Oakland. One was the assassination of Oscar Grant on the Fruitvale BART station on January 1st, where they just had the 10th anniversary, and you see remnants of family members and people still raising that. But in Oakland, what I see with the Uhuru movement is a concrete manifestation of building dual and contending power for African people in the form of Uhuru Foods and Pies here in Oakland right now, doing the work that needs to be done. That to me is really truly upholding the memory of Oscar Grant. But following the Oscar Grant murder by this BART pig back in 2009, on March 21st, 2009, just 4 blocks from the Uhuru house, there was a courageous young man named Lavelle Nixon who had a confrontation with the Oakland Police Department. And after that confrontation, after the dust had cleared, there was 4 Oakland police officers were dead, and Lavelle Nixon himself died in some kind of a gunfight, so they say. And they really locked down the African community on March 23rd, 2009 in Oakland. As I said, I was standing out in front of the Uhuru house earlier that morning, and you can see a lot of police activity where they were stopping Africans with these routine traffic stops where they're set up in our neighborhoods all over the country. And I saw that activity, but a little while later, it was like a flurry of police cars running down the street, and it was crazy. So when I started walking down the street to go see what was happening, because I knew it was in the neighborhood, we couldn't get 2 blocks past where the Uhuru house was to see what was happening in the community. The pigs had it on lockdown, and they were quite vicious in their way to keep people from entering the little encirclement that they had. They had roped off the community a couple of blocks away from where the shooting had occurred. And it was later in the day before I really found out what had happened, and it was on the news. And what they tried to do was a day or 2 after the police killing, they tried to have these vigils for these 4 slain Oakland police officers. Through the media, crying crocodile tears for these guys who came into this community and doing good in this community and so on and so forth. They really tried to portray the red, white, and blue and upholding the law and stuff. So what we decided to do with the Uhuru movement was to have a vigil for the resistance of the African working class that we saw in Lavelle Nixon. We did not know if Lavelle Nixon was political or not. We did not know if he was a part of organization or not. But we did recognize that Lavelle Nixon stood for the resistance of the African community, and we had to go in there and uphold that. So in short order, we put together some leaflets. We went door to door, calling on the African community to have a vigil and a march and a rally upholding the resistance of Lavelle Nixon, and as a way to try to organize Africans. And we really didn't know how many people would come. We organized this within a day or 2. And we had our march, it was hundreds and hundreds of African workers from throughout the neighborhood right there, young brothers and sisters who we had not seen at meetings at the Uhuru House that we were holding every Sunday. We did not see them there prior to that, but they came. And we took the streets in Oakland, and there was not one cop within miles and miles of that area, of 79th and MacArthur down to 73rd and MacArthur in Deep East Oakland. And it was a great, great mobilization, great struggle. African workers were there, and it was fully televised, which was good for people around the world to see African workers upholding resistance. And it was in direct opposition of the vigil that they held 2 days earlier trying to uphold these cops. So that was truly a really strong showing of the work of African internationalism on the ground in Oakland. It was a theory of the African working class understanding what needed to happen to organize the masses of our people, and not just in fighting back in terms of organizing the march and rally, but trying to deepen it through selling the burning spear and willing them to come to the Sunday meetings that we had every week there in Oakland. It was just a powerful mobilization. And just to go back a minute, there was 2 weeks before, 2 months before that, Lavelle Mixon situation, after Oscar Grant was murdered, we did have a march and rally that the movement had did on Martin Luther King weekend in January. And there was hundreds and hundreds of people who came to that mobilization of Oscar Grant. And it was quite different from the other mobilizations that had occurred after the Oscar Grant murder in Oakland, where you found people going downtown to empty buildings and closed businesses, and you saw a lot of police tear gas and fighting in the streets at downtown Oakland. And what we decided to do was to have to march into the African community, going through the neighborhoods where Africans live. And we had what we considered a very successful mobilization, which was to take the organization to the people to sum up what happened to Oscar Grant was colonialism and not racism, and to take the information and to win the people to come to the Uhuru House. So for me, those two events in 2009 were quite telling, and they upheld, again, the African international stance that we saw, that we're hearing about in this meeting here. And also, a couple of weeks after the Lavelle Mixon march and rally, I think we were contacted by Bill O'Reilly for us to come to San Francisco to speak on the Lavelle Mixon march and rally as to why we did that and why would we do something like that. And so we accepted that. I know I talked with the chairman before that, and you know, I basically put forward that I felt confident that we could go into that meeting and take it on, which is what we did. And again, it was being armed with African internationalism that gives African workers the confidence to go into the arena of the bourgeoisie to take them on damn near any question. And in this particular Bill O'Reilly program, Sally Moyenda and myself went to San Francisco. We went to the studio. They had us in this dark, empty room with a bright light in our face with microphones in our ears. They had this Negro former mayor of the city of San Francisco, Willie Brown, was there. And Bill O'Reilly was in some kind of a studio in New York. So we took it on. And they really tried very hard to demonize the organizing efforts of African workers to uphold this cop killer, is what they termed it as. But what we did, we took on this struggle in a brilliant way. I thought I didn't really get a feel of how I did, because, again, I was in a dark, empty room with a light in my face and microphone in my ear. But after we finished, I got word back from yourself, Chairman, and other people who had watched that, who, you know, really thought I did a good job. And again, it was hard to tell because of the way the circumstances were. But after I watched the video, that is no longer able to be found on the internet, by the way. Initially, after it was aired, I do know that it was easy to Google up and find it, but nowadays you can't find any video of that Bill O'Reilly interview with Uhuru Muhammad. Nowhere on the internet can you find it, believe me. And I'm pretty sure Bill O'Reilly has something to do with that.
Well, the government has something to do with it. Yeah,
exactly. But, you know, they got dusted. You know, they could not demonize us. They could not, they had to, and even Willie Brown at times doing that had to unite with some things that we were putting out about the conditions of the African community and about the resistance of the African community, and we're well within our rights to uphold the resistance of Lavelle Mixon. But for me, that was a real brilliant, shiny moment in the history of the party in Oakland, California in 2000. Uhuru.
That was a brilliant moment, Bakri. I just want to salute you again. That was incredible because Bill Riley, or Riley, is supposed to have been this, you know, he's one of the best, most vicious, they call him right wing, but opponent of African people, resistance, revolution, any place. And the reason they brought you over there was to destroy you publicly and to destroy the notion of resistance and etc. And just the opposite happened. You were cool, you were very good, and you wiped them out. African internationalism is invincible, and that's what Bill O'Reilly came to know and understand, and that's why you can't find it. You can't find this anymore, because one of the things that you'll find is that, as I mentioned earlier, the rulers will do everything they can to remove any evidence of the victory and the history of the success of the revolution, and they'll even go onto your any evidence they can do that shows our victories. They'll try to remove it, but you were magnificent, and the damage has already been done. Comrade Yeshitela, Uhuru.
Uhuru, comrade.
Uhuru. Yeah, I'm just letting you have it.
Okay. Well, comrade. So I just really want to appreciate the entire discussion so far, and just really hearing a lot of the work that the party has done to build up the revolutionary capacity of the African working class. And I joined the party joined the movement in 2008, associated with the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project. I met the party at an African Liberation Day celebration in Washington, D.C., and I had been hearing about the African Liberation Day, and I was living in New York, but then when I moved to the area, I was like, okay, I got to be a part of this. And one of the reasons why I really wanted to come was the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project. I had previously been in touch with some of the forces in Zimbabwe, and I saw that the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project was involved in developing that project. And so, and that also there were so many other things that I saw from the APSP's website that really spoke to the significance of, you know, some of the things that I was trying to do as an individual, but I really wanted to be able to contribute and listen to Director speak some more about what APSP is all about. So when I arrived at the African Liberation Day event, I was struck by the fact that there was more than just the APSP. I mean, I knew there was going to be more on the program, but I was really introduced to a lot of concepts that I hadn't heard of before, like the state, and really, you know, it brought together all of these ideas, these thoughts, the things that were happening in the world to African people. I heard a culmination of a theory that really explained everything. It explained, you know, the petty bourgeoisie. It explained the bourgeoisie of the state, colonialism, which is another term that, while I've heard about it referenced in the past, I hadn't heard about it as something that was really representative of our conditions today. And it really took hold of me. I was compelled at that point to really join the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project, and I did so in 2008. And really that was a launching point to, like, really changing my whole trajectory in life. And, you know, I was really I quickly became a part of the leadership of the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project, and helped to build a branch in Washington, D.C. I didn't know how to do any of that stuff, by the way. I was just like, this is such a great organization. I need to make this happen, you know, here. Like, we have to make this happen in this area. So I reached out to Comrade Aisha, and I was just like, we need to, you know, do we have any contacts here? I want to call a meeting. And, you know, we proceeded to call a meeting, and we brought in some forces who really play a really important role in the building of the All African People's Development Empowerment Project in Washington, D.C. We had a community garden in Ivy City. We initiated a Saturday school in Valley Farms, which is one of the most depressed areas of the African community in Southeast Washington, D.C. And what was going on, and it's still undergoing a very serious gentrification development there to push out the poor working class by allowing housing developments to be go down to the poorest conditions. And so while we had a Saturday school there, our primary objective was not just to educate children and bring them, you know, knowledge of Africa and things like that. We wanted to organize the community by bringing together, you know, forces who were dealing with this anti-gentrification issue and establishing a Valley Farms community collaborative that was helping to fight back against the gentrification, in addition to us organizing the children and the parents around the projects of the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project. And it was in the stages that we were really involved with, you know, initially with the forces in Zimbabwe. Also, we were working locally in Washington, D.C. We were also working internationally with forces who were on the continent of Africa in Zimbabwe, which didn't turn out too well because of opportunism that's rife with that type of work. And also began to see the initial stages of the work that needed to happen in Sierra Leone. And you know, I think that there's something that to be said about people who believe that they can do this work by themselves, of individuals as forces who are trying to do these little projects here and there, and how APSP is, you know, making the call to all these forces to abandon that individualism and come and bring your skills to the African revolution through the work of the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project. And what we've seen, you know, is that when that's done, is that there are so many things that we can accomplish. Even with some of the short forces that we had at the time, we were still able to accomplish a magnanimous amount of work. And so, you know, I just think that the theory of African internationalism helped me understand that we're not just doing this work in Africa or anywhere else in the African world based on, you know, just on trying to solve the agricultural question or trying to do some rainwater harvesting project, but that this is forwarding the revolution of African workers and pushing forward the idea that, you know, only we can solve the problems, only we can overturn these conditions, because the petty bourgeoisie and the bourgeoisie, imperialism and capitalism is really parasitic in, you know, stealing our resources and stealing our labor for their own interests, and we have to use our own skills for our interests. And, you know, this was my introduction to the work, and I came into the party, I think, shortly thereafter, being a member of the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project. And it was then that I became a leading, an organizer also in the party unit in Washington, D.C. And at some point, I think it was, I can't remember the date, but, you know, becoming the chair back then and of the party in D.C. And I also think that it was significant that when I came into the party in D.C., before I became the chair, there was women leadership. And I just think that I want to raise that up because, you know, I don't know if there's any, you know, I was involved in a lot of different ideas in organizations, and I wouldn't even say organizations, just these groups of people who were upset about, you know, the conditions of African people. But it really was a disorganized group of individuals who, you know, really just couldn't come to any sort of unified vision of what was necessary to break down, you know, these things.
And, you know, it's really important for me, you know, I'm not some sort of like gender, you know, I don't see women and flock to women stuff, but like, it, you know, at the time, I was really struck by the fact that here we have this African People's Socialist Party, this most significant theory, this huge mission to, you know, move African people out of, you know, these conditions by overturning the capitalist system. And I was struck, really surprised by the fact that here we have a local unit led by African women. And that really, you know, really was important to me. And I can't really explain why, because like I said, I wasn't really running toward things that was linked to African women or anything like that. But I just thought that was significant. And just, I guess, for my own development, just really seeing that, you know, the political analysis, the ideology of African internationalism can be held and put forward by African women. And also that, you know, my leadership, even within the international scope, was Aisha Fields, you know, Aisha Fields, and she was, you know, this really, I was just blown away by just her political analysis, which came through African internationalism. And all of the other African women that were in the party at the time, but these were my two closest contacts. And so I just thought that was really significant. And this was my introduction into the party, and which led me later to take on the position of the president of the African National Women's Organization, which I now lead. So, yeah, you know, 2008, 2009 is when I joined the movement. And also one more thing is that my first, this is not in the early 2000s, but it is, you know, 2012 was my first trip to Africa. And I am so glad that I went to Africa as a revolutionary. I am so glad that I didn't go as some petty bourgeois trying to see how I can get my money up type of individual. I am so glad that I went to Africa as a revolutionary, working with the workers, the poor, and working class Africans, trying to solve problems and build up our capacity to like really learn how we can overturn this thing and build projects that can solve some of the immediate contradictions. But my first trip to Africa was as a revolutionary, and I just really thank the party for giving, you know, me the opportunity to be a part of that work, because it really changed my life. Uhuru.
Uhuru. I'm going to go ahead and move this process forward. We're going to be a little over, but Comrade Yeshitela didn't get an opportunity to talk about this incredible work that she did to organize the founding conference of it was an international conference, more or less, of the African National Women's Organization, how one was held in Washington, D.C., and another was held in London, England, where African women came out, and in England, women who were born and came from different parts of the African world, United States. It was just an incredible development to see this happen, and it was also a part of the party's real concrete struggle to elevate the African women to a rightful place in history. And on our Central Committee, we have created this post for the African National Women's Organization leadership. This is to make sure that African women, the interests of African women are always on our agenda. But it was also not just an attempt to ghettoize the question, as you've seen with some other organization, with the Women's Commission or Women's something, because more than half of the party's leadership is a leadership of women. And so while the parties, the women in the party have had an opportunity to put their hands on every aspect of the struggle, all of our analyses in general, on the one hand, to lead the most sensitive and important areas of our structures, that on the other hand, we've also added recognition that we're involved in an ongoing struggle that even exists inside our party around the question of women. And so I just wanted to say that I thought that's been important work that Comrade Aisha has taken on. And moving forward, before we get to the announcements and things like that. And before we end it, many people are aware of the work that our party has done around the 3 John black girls. You may remember in March 31st, I think it was, of 2016, the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department drowned 3 African girls, 2 of whom were 15 and 1 was 16. They murdered them. There's no other way to put it. And after they murdered them, we saw a situation where sectors of the African petty bourgeoisie in Pinellas County, St. Petersburg, Florida, came out to support the police, the sheriff's account of what happened. And that these African women, working class women, who were the mothers of these children, some of them in serious kind of distress already, colonial distress already prior to the murder, and one of them working in near slave-like conditions early every morning, caring for her and all of her children by herself. And the party intervened in this struggle and to found the sister and one of the sisters, and actually took on the struggle. And a point that I would make is that that was an important struggle. But it was bigger than just the woman that we were talking about. The fact is that our state is our people are under colonial siege by a colonial state, a relationship with a colonial state, a government that treats African people a certain way, and that contributes to the oppression and exploitation of our people. And so when we saw this, and there seemed to have been some evidence that we were looking at someone who was, unlike many of the other mothers whose children had been murdered by the government, unwilling to just take a payoff from the government, but wanted to struggle, wanted to actually unite with the African Liberation Movement. We thought it was really important. That's why we took that struggle on. And that's why we're proud of all the work that we've done around that struggle. And we'll be talking more about that moving forward throughout this process. But I just want to say that someone should not be surprised about that work. Shouldn't be surprised. That's because of the history of struggle we've done around African women. The African People's Child Care Collective, for example, that was created to create a socialist approach to collectivizing child care that, for African women who, generally speaking, are often trapped with the trapped politically, trapped socially, trapped economically, with the responsibility of 24-hour care of children. That's almost impossible. That's why that whole premise of it takes a village to raise a child comes from Africa, because it's almost impossible to put impossible conditions on African women. And then African women are responsible for the consequences, the negative consequences that stem from this impossible situation that they've been put in. But the fact is that that's not the first time. Connie Tucker, we raised an international struggle around Connie Tucker, who became a member and became a leader of our party, who had been framed up in Florida for marijuana possession in order to disrupt and destroy a militant organization that existed at the time in Tampa, Florida, and whose case was so flimsy, so obviously manufactured, that they were able to win a conviction and sentence this sister to 5 years in prison, despite the fact that they couldn't produce a single bit of evidence in court because, as they said, they had to use all the evidence to test it to find out that it was marijuana, which was obviously ridiculous, but it didn't have to make sense. But we fought for Connie Tucker. We made an international campaign. We even had people who were the Young Republican Club, uniting with the Free Connie Tucker demand. There was Al Courtney. We raised that struggle in a very serious way of him being imprisoned. We raised the struggle of Desi Woods, and this, in our view, is a classic struggle. When Desi Woods was locked up in the 1970s because she shot and killed a white man dead. His name was Ronnie Horn, who, with his friend, had attempted to rape Desi Woods and rape Cheryl Todd, who she was with, in his car, and she took his gun that he was using to threaten them with, and shot him dead. And we waged an incredible struggle around that. So we have a history of resistance. We have a history of uniting. And Desi Woods, they threw in a prison cell. They filled her with drugs and what have you, treated her horribly during the time she was held in captivity. But Desi Woods never surrendered. And that's why they had to put her on drugs. And the very moment they put her in the prison, she turned around and said, I'm leaving. And so they put her on drugs and treated her in a very horrible way. So the party has a history. And we tried to take this case on in a way that was different, because at the end, the whole movement, there was a case of Joanne Little, a sister from North Carolina, who had killed a white sheriff. She was in jail, and the sheriff was found one morning dead in his cell with his pants down around his ankles, and an ice pick stuck in him, and ejaculation all over the place, because he had gone in to rape Joanne Little. And Joanne Little was gone, and the whole case around Joanne Little developed. But this instance, it was a case that was fought around the right of a woman to self-defense, which did not advance the struggle of African liberation at all. It helped the women's movement, it helps the feminist movement, it helps the Me Too movement, but it didn't do a damn thing for African liberation. So we had an opportunity with Desi Woods to free Desi Woods, smash colonial violence, because that's what happened. It was colonialism that was responsible for Desi Woods being in prison. It wasn't a right to a woman's, wasn't a woman's right for self-defense. They were killing black people all over the world. And for someone to selectively pull out Desi Woods in order to build another kind of movement that had nothing to do with our revolution was not to be accepted. But the point I wanted to make is we did defend Desi Woods. We made an incredible movement. Desi Woods was strong. That's what she continued to say over and over again. I am strong. And she remained an anti-colonialist resistor until her death. And so we have this history of taking on these struggles as a party. And I want to finally say this, that there have been forces who would have the party dead, disappeared off the planet Earth. And the fact we're still here. We're still here after the Black Revolution of the 60s in general was defeated. We're not here as a consequence of some accident. We're here because we were clear on what we had to do to survive. And when the revolution of the 60s, a black revolution of the 60s, around which every other revolutionary movement, every other militant movement, everything from the feminist movement to the homosexual movement to everything revolved around this struggle of black liberation. And what our party did was, when the attack came on our party, on the revolution in general, we opened up a whole new front for the revolution. We opened up an entirely new front of the revolution. We made it necessary for white power to have to defend itself in its own house. We organized the African People's Solidarity Committee, white people who became anti-colonial zealots, who became part of the struggle under African internationalist principles, who began to go where all of the money in the world is located in a white community someplace, and the revolution needed, black people needed, it's ours in the first place. And so we organized a formation that was designed to simply go for that, to get those resources, and take the black revolution into the white community, open up an entirely new front, making white power have to fight in its own house, as opposed to us simply being surrounded, fighting for our lives. And as a consequence of doing that, the party and the black revolution is still alive, and we're alive almost 50 years after the attack on the revolution. And somebody complains about that, and they complain because they would have the party dead, and they would contrive all kinds of excuses and attacks on the party because of the role of white people. But that's an old attack. It's not new. I mean, from the very beginning, white people attacked it from the so-called white left, because they couldn't imagine white people working under the leadership of black people. And there are black people who can't imagine white people working under the leadership of white people, of black people, and they have to contrive all kinds of lies in order to say, in order to disguise the fact that it was a brilliant strategy on the part of the party, and it was recognition of the totality of the revolutionary project that we involved in. We do not live in a vacuum. We are not in a cocoon. We live in the world. And the world has to be brought into this process of revolution, and to the extent that we can win everybody in the world to unite with the struggle of African people for African liberation, we have been successful and we have been smart, as opposed to isolating ourselves voluntarily, so that the government and this enemy of ours, which is on every place on the planet, using every venue, using every tool at its command to destroy us, they can't do it that easily, because they have to fight to cover their own butts because we have put the revolution in their bedrooms, in their living rooms, in their houses, in their communities, etc. And we are retrieving the resources necessary to contribute to the work of the revolution. And that's what you see with the African People's Socialist Party, despite all the efforts historically that have been made to attack us on this front, because what has happened is that you see people who are opposed to revolution. They don't come up with a program. They don't come up with a strategy. They don't come up with a philosophy. They just say that, look at the white people, and yes, look at the white people. We've never hidden it. You can read our political report, and I advise you to do that. Everything we do, put it forward, and that's the thing that contributes to a whole movement in St. Louis now that's raising up the entire African community of St. Louis and various other places where we do the work. So I just wanted to hand that off to you, and I know I've overtalked, and this brother is looking at me really with near hostility because he wants to move this program forward in terms of the study. But I want to just go ahead and lay those things out. Uhuru.
Uhuru, let's salute Chairman Omali Yeshitela for this brilliant study. And because of time, we won't be able to get to any questions, but we want everybody to know that when you ask a question, one of our moderators will correspond with you to make sure that the chairman sees it. This study was brought to you by the Department of Agitation.
So we can't take any, huh? Is that it? Is that, I mean, I'm following your leadership comment, but, so everything is closed down?
That's what I was.
Okay, all right.
This study was brought to you by the Department of Agitation and Propaganda, Winning the War of Ideas. For your worldwide revolutionary news and analysis, visit theburningspear.com. For revolutionary radio, dynamic shows, and music by Africans all around the world, tune into Black Power 96.3 FM, broadcasting out of St. Petersburg, Florida, and accessible via the Black Power 96 app for Apple and Android, or online at blackpower96.org. Did you unite with what you heard today and want to learn more about how you can get involved with the African People's Socialist Party? Visit APSP.org for all information regarding how you can apply. Join the Freedom Mass Choir and Band. The Freedom Mass Choir and Band is an all-African community group of singers and instrumentalists that sing songs of resistance and revolution. Members are located throughout the United States and attend weekly rehearsals both in person and via live stream and video. Sign up by emailing blackpowerchoir@gmail.com or call 727-537-6736. On January 26th in London, join the Party for the Africa and Africans Must Unite speakers event featuring Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Beginning at 2 p.m., presentations from Secretary General Louise Kinshasa, Deputy Chairwoman Onazane Yeshitela, Burton, Chairman of APSP France, Tafari Mujeri, Chair of APSP South Africa, and APSC Chairwoman Penny Hess will electrify and sum up the many faces of the crisis of imperialism and call on Africans to unite on our own black agenda, no matter where it is we have been dispersed. For more information, contact uhuruasi@aol.com. On March 23rd through 24th, join the African National Women's Organization for the National Plenary being held in St. Louis, Missouri. African women's role in the revolution is on the front lines, and ANWO helps us to understand this by showing us its tremendous leadership of African women heading important campaigns like Arrest CPS, the state apparatus that steals black children away from their mothers and places them in the hands of the system to be either abused or kidnapped by white people. All African people should be a part of ANWO, and this plenary, all African women should be a part of ANWO, and this plenary will make it clear why. Visit anwouhuru.org to learn more about this event. April 6th and 7th, the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations will be conducting its third electoral campaign school in St. Petersburg, Florida. Do you want to learn how you can run for office on a revolutionary platform such as a national black political agenda for self-determination to win? You don't want to miss this school. And that is it for announcement.
Also, Congo webinar that on YouTube, is that right? Channel that comes at what time? Eastern? 11 Eastern Standard Time. And so people can find it by doing what? Going to Uhuru Congo on YouTube, and that will feature Comrade Louisa Kinshasa, the Secretary General of African Socialists International, he would be the primary force. I would be there with him. There's a lot of stuff happening in Congo to our people, and we need to be informed, and we need to be organized as African people around the world to address that. So that's going to be 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time in a few minutes from now at Uhuru Congo YouTube. Uhuru.
So we want to thank everybody for tuning in, and you can join us next Sunday at the same time. Uhuru.
Uhuru. All right.